December 21, 1984, will forever be etched in the minds of the residents of Longmont, Colorado, as the night a 12-year-old girl vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a family torn apart by grief. Jonelle Matthews was last seen walking home from a holiday party with a family member, but her disappearance would spark a decades-long investigation that would haunt the small town for years to come. As the search effort launched, the streets of Longmont were transformed into a war zone, with volunteers, police officers, and helicopters scouring every inch of the neighborhood, but despite the massive effort, no signs of Jonelle were found. Her family, friends, and community held on to hope as the days turned into weeks, but it seemed like the more time that passed, the more elusive the truth became. The investigation was led by the Longmont Police Department, with assistance from the FBI and other local agencies. Detectives Mike Levine and Mike Wagner were tasked with piecing together the events of that fateful night, but the more they dug, the more they realized that Jonelle's disappearance was not just a simple case of a missing child. They found inconsistencies in the alibis of those who were present at the party, and potential suspects began to emerge. One of the early suspects was a family friend who had been seen arguing with Jonelle earlier that night, but when questioned, he produced an airtight alibi, and the lead went cold. As the months went by, the case went cold, and the focus shifted to other crimes in the area, but Jonelle's family never gave up hope of finding their daughter. In 2012, nearly 3 decades after Jonelle's disappearance, a breakthrough came in the form of DNA evidence. The Longmont Police Department had collected DNA samples from the crime scene, but at the time, they didn't have a match. However, with advancements in technology, the DNA was re-examined, and a surprise match was found. The DNA belonged to a 17-year-old high school student named Austin Reed Sigg. Sigg was arrested and charged with Jonelle's murder, but what made the case even more shocking was that Sigg had a prior conviction for a similar crime. In 2011, he had killed a jogger in a neighboring town, and the DNA evidence from that crime scene matched the DNA found at Jonelle's scene. The connection was too strong to ignore, and Sigg's guilt was all but sealed. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Sigg had been targeting young women in the area, and Jonelle's disappearance was just the tip of the iceberg. The police found a journal belonging to Sigg, detailing his fantasies and motives for the crimes. The journal was a chilling glimpse into the mind of a serial killer, and it sent a shiver down the spines of those who read it. Sigg's trial was a sensationalized media event, with the entire nation watching as the 17-year-old defendant sat in the courtroom, his eyes fixed on the floor. The prosecution presented a wealth of evidence, including the DNA match, the journal, and eyewitness testimony. Sigg's defense team argued that their client was a troubled teenager who had made a terrible mistake, but the jury was not convinced. On April 17, 2014, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and Austin Reed Sigg was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought closure to Jonelle's family, but it also raised questions about the failures of the justice system that allowed Sigg to continue his killing spree for so long. As the dust settled on the case, the people of Longmont, Colorado, were left to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of the tragedy that had befallen their community. The case of Jonelle Matthews was a sobering reminder of the darkness that lurks in the hearts of some individuals, and the importance of never giving up hope in the face of adversity. On December 20, 1984, Jonelle Matthews, a bright and ambitious 12-year-old 6th grader, vanished from her home in the small town of Greeley, Colorado. The case would go on to become one of the most enduring and baffling cold cases in American true crime history. Jonelle, a talented singer and student, had been dropped off at her home by her mother, Jean, after a holiday party, at around 8:30 p.m. Her parents were in the process of getting a divorce at the time, and Jonelle's father, Jim, had recently moved out of the family home. The family's living situation was strained, but Jonelle's mother had assured her that everything would be okay. The next morning, Jonelle's mother began to worry when her daughter failed to appear for breakfast. She called Jonelle's friends and classmates, but no one had seen or heard from her. A search party was quickly assembled, and the local police department was notified. Investigators began canvassing the neighborhood, interviewing witnesses, and reviewing security footage. One of the first witnesses to come forward was a neighbor who reported seeing Jonelle walking home from the party the previous night. However, the neighbor's account was later disputed by another witness, who claimed to have seen Jonelle getting into a car with a stranger. The conflicting testimony would become a recurring theme throughout the investigation. As the search for Jonelle continued, investigators began to focus on her family members, particularly her father, Jim. He had a history of erratic behavior and had been known to have a volatile relationship with Jonelle's mother. However, Jim had an airtight alibi for the time Jonelle went missing, and he was eventually cleared as a suspect. The investigation dragged on for months, with no leads or signs of Jonelle's whereabouts. The case went cold, but the Matthews family never gave up hope of finding their daughter. In 2019, nearly 35 years after Jonelle's disappearance, a breakthrough came when investigators reopened the case and began re-examining the evidence. New DNA technology was applied to a pair of Jonelle's genes, which had been collected as evidence in 1984. The results revealed a DNA match to a man named Stephen Pankey, a former acquaintance of Jonelle's family. Pankey had a history of violence and had been known to have a fascination with true crime. He was arrested and charged with Jonelle's murder in 2020. The trial was a dramatic and emotional rollercoaster for the Matthews family, who finally had closure after decades of uncertainty. Pankey's defense team argued that the DNA evidence was contaminated and that their client was innocent. However, the prosecution presented a compelling case, highlighting Pankey's history of violence and his suspicious behavior in the days following Jonelle's disappearance. In the end, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and Pankey was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case of Jonelle Matthews served as a reminder that even the most seemingly unsolvable mysteries can be solved with the help of new technology and a relentless pursuit of justice.